In this video, I'm going to walk you through all the different ways you can modify your dynamic data. Bubble has a handful of operators and calculators, tools that you can use to change the way your dynamic expressions output a value, whether it's to display to your users or to save to your database. This is kind of the subcategory list of operators, modifiers that Bubble has available to you that we're going to work through. So you can reformat your values. So it's the same value, but just displayed in a different way. So think, for example, a date is displayed with European formatting versus American formatting. We can extract components. So think of an address, right? We can extract just the city component or just the postal code. With manipulating lists, there's a lot that you can do there. You can split up your lists in different ways. You can display each item of the list in a certain way. You can constrain your list, filter your list, lots of manipulations there. Bubble also has a few different calculations built into the dynamic composer. So you can count up the number of characters, you can count up the number of items in a list, you can take the averages of a list of numbers, things like that. And then there's certain conditional scenarios where you can work with dynamic expressions to evaluate things. If something is empty versus not empty, what do we display in those cases? So we'll look at some examples there. Let's start with reformatting values here. I'm going to add a text element to the page so we can see some examples of reformatting values. Let's start with a text value. So I'm just going to go with a simple current user's first name. Now, when you click on this More menu, you're going to see all of the list of possible operators and conditional validations that you can apply to the expression's value that came right before it. So depending on what this expression turns into, right? So right now it's evaluating to a single text, you're going to get certain operators. If this was a number, I would get different operators. If this was a date, if this was a list of things. So this is a very context sensitive list of items available to you. So just be aware of that. Also know that you can stack modifications on top of each other. So let me show you an example. Let's say I want to make this first name all uppercase. So what that's going to do, okay, so by default, it was just going to show Monica. I'm logged in as this person, and that's how it's saved in the database. But with that uppercase modifier, it's going to do this. All uppercase. It's not changing the values in the database. I want to be very clear about that. There are no workflows involved here. So we're not updating the database. We are just real-time manipulating on the page. So maybe on one page I have it displayed as uppercase, but another page in all lowercase if I wanted to do that. At the end of the day, the raw format of the data is however we have it in the database, and then we can just change, right? We can reformat for specific use cases in our design here. Now, what I was saying before is that you can actually stack operators on top of each other. So maybe I want to make this all uppercase, but then I also want to truncate this to the first 4 characters. Okay, so what Bubble is going to do is read everything from left to right. First, it's going to find the current user. Then it's going to find that user's first name. Then it's going to make it all uppercase. Then it's going to truncate it to the first 4 characters. And this is what we end up with here. Okay, from left to right. So start with the most general kind of raw format, raw value, and append your operators in the order that you need them to. Sometimes, the order of your operators may give you a different result, so just be mindful of that. Okay, so with text, a lot of these operations are pretty self-explanatory, so we can make them lowercase, we can capitalize words if we have multiple words here. If I wanted to append something, all I would need to do is add additional text, so I can pull in from a dynamic source, or I can even type in, some value here. Let me remove this truncation. So I'm appending -100. Let's say you had like an invoice system and you wanted to append some kind of a suffix at the end of the invoice. Here. Okay, so Monica -100. Again, it's not changing anything in the database. I'm not adding this value to the data. It's just displaying it. If you need to save your manipulations to the database, well, that's when you would involve a workflow, right? I might have this expression in an input instead of a plain text element and save the value of that input to my record, right? To some field in the database. Okay, a couple other examples for manipulations you can make to text. Trimmed will remove the extra spaces at the beginning and end of a value. It won't remove any spaces in the middle, just at the very beginning and the end. There are a couple of things in here that we won't go into just because they're more advanced and they're not used as frequently, but I do encourage you to play around with these and see what happens. Create a blank page in your application, put some values, some text elements on the page, preview it so you understand what these things will do. Okay. We already looked at truncating, right? So you just give this a number of characters. It's going to truncate to 5 characters. You can also go from the other end of the string. So from the end, I can truncate backwards if I needed to do it that way. Okay, so those are some examples of some manipulations you can make to text. Let's take a look at dates. So let's take the user's creation date as an example. Now we have many different operations available to us here because we can do a lot of date math and date conversions with a date value. The first one, very popular with dates, is this expression here, formatted as. And Bubble has a bunch of preset date formats that you can choose from. You can also customize your own date format. Bubble has a couple of, you can see here all of the variables that you can work with. So if I wanted to show, day, that's 3 Ds to show an abbreviation of the day of week. If I wanted to do another D, then it will show the full day of week. I can show the time, hour, minute. So it does, if you do capital H's, that's a 24-hour time. If you do lowercase h's, it's in 12-hour time. If I wanted to do 12-hour lowercase, then I can do TT to have the AM or PM there for me. So you can play around with that custom formatting for dates. Very important to note that if you're going to format a date, the value of this expression is now a text. Okay, it's now a text. It's not a date value. So from here, this expression, I would not be able to put this into a calendar. I would not be able to do date math with it. In fact, if I wanted to append more manipulations, take a look at this. We're back to our text manipulators. Okay, so if the last thing I want to do is reformat the way that it looks, or I should say, I should reverse that sentence. If I want to make manipulations to my date by changing different components, like adding a certain number of days, right? Let's say I want to add 5 days to this. Then the last thing I want to do is formatting it to display it in a certain way because it's going to convert it to a text. And from here, I will not be able to manipulate the date further. So all date math should happen first before I change it to a text if that's something that I want to do. Without this formatting, by default, Bubble's just going to display the date and time with, a default formatting. So you can preview the page and see what this looks like here. The custom formatting is simply if you want to show it differently, right? So it's going to give me an abbreviated month, day, year, and then your time in 12-hour format, okay? So other date manipulations you can make, you can add components, just like I did with the day. I can add seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, years. I can also just change individual components. So let's say I wanted to take this date, keep the exact same value, but change the year to 2022. So I'll change the year here to, and then I'll type in 2022. So it's going to have the exact same value, except the year will be swapped out. It's still a date value, just like that, right? March 23rd, 2022. That was the original creation date before I had added days, which was why it was a different date there. I can also put in dynamic values for this change, right? I typed in 22, but what if I wanted to insert the current year? Because maybe this expression needs to work off of whatever the current year is. So I'll take the current date and time, right? I'm changing years to the current date and time. Now the current date and time is a full date. It's not just a year. When we want to change years to something, it's looking for a number, right? A year. So I'm going to take the current date and time and then extract the year from the current date and time. You see all these components you can take out of this here. Okay, so this is actually going to give me the same value because I'm currently in 2022, but it's more dynamic. Next year, when I load the page, I would not have needed to make a change to the dynamic expression, but it will automatically say 2023 because it will be a different year. Okay, so that's another manipulation you can make to your dates, is changing individual components. I can also compare dates with one another. The creation date, if I basically create a true or false statement, right? The creation date is greater than the current date and time. This is actually an example of a conditional. This is either true or false. So this is going to evaluate to a yes or no value. It's basically going to tell me, yes, this is a true statement, or no, this is not a true statement. Now we see no here because we know that the creation date, 2019, is not greater than the current date and time. It's earlier. Now, if I wanted to reformat this, this no value to something that's more useful for my user, right? This is a yes or no value. Well, I can add more. And here I have a few, right? A lot less than texts and dates, but I have a couple of options for reformatting my yes and no values. Common one is to go through formatting as text. So instead of showing literally yes or no, I can say this user, this is kind of a bad example because the user's creation is always going to be before the current date and time. A user's creation is never going to be in the future. But anyway, we'll say this user was, is not yet created, something like this, or this user has already been created. Okay. All of this to say is that instead of seeing the word no, we can reformat from our conditional expression a different display of text to make it more helpful for my users. Okay. All right, let's see what other date values we can do here. So if I wanted to extract different components from the date, right, just like this, just like I showed you with the current date and time, I can do that there. I think those are all the ones that I want to go over for dates. Let's take a look at numbers now. Let's actually use an input here to have a number. Okay, I'm going to put an integer and I'm just going to type in the number 100, and next to it, all right, or below it, right here, we're going to manipulate this number. So first of all, when you come from numbers, so this text is going to pull from that inputs value, which is a number, you can do math with the number. Okay, so I can say, all right, add 500 to my number and then multiply by 10. Again, everything reads from left to right. So be mindful when you're wanting to do math. There's no order of operations. You know, normally with order of operations, the multiplication would happen first and then the addition. But with bubble expressions, it's actually going to read from left to right. If you need to do more complex math expressions, I suggest you install the Toolbox plugin and work with the expressions element. There you can mix and match static with dynamic characters, and it will honor order of operations with parentheses and everything else, okay? And the output of that expression element will be your result, all right? So here, like I said, you can do math. Let's do a quick preview of this page here. So my original number was 100. And then it was going to add 500 to that, so that's 600 times 10 is going to give us 6,000. If I change this number in real time, it'll recalculate that. Again, remember, we're not doing anything with the database. This is just real-time formatting here. I could have multiple inputs if I wanted and combine these together, input A plus input B, and then do some more math there as well. A lot of times with financial-based applications that have a lot of number calculations that have to happen, pre-calculations, you know, you can leverage your database, of course, to save pre-calculated values there. But for efficiency and performance, a lot of times if you just do these calculations in hidden inputs on the page, and what I mean by that is these inputs do not have to be visible. I'm going to turn these off here in order to calculate. The text element is still referencing them. They still exist on the page, and it will still be able to do that math. Right, it's still calculating here 2,000 from my hidden inputs that have 100 in them as their initial contents. Okay. All right, so let's remove these and let's just go back to our one input to take a look at some other numerical operators. So Bubble can also, you know, round things if we're going to have multiple decimal places. If we're on a decimal number, it'll give us the floor, which is the lowest whole integer, or the ceiling, the highest, the next highest whole integer. Okay, and numbers like dates also let you reformat them with specific styling here. Now again, reformatting converts it to a text. So make sure to do all of your numerical manipulations and math before you finalize it with some stylized display. Now you may not need to do this, it just depends on your use case, but if you need to format it, for example, as a currency with 2 decimal places, 1,000 separator, and a currency symbol, right? This is now a text output. When you are saving prices, for example, to your database, you don't need to worry about saving it with the formatting. Formatting is just a display. It's just a stylized format of a number. What you want to save to the database are your raw values so that you can do manipulations wherever you need, right? You want the raw values to make it as flexible as possible for you wherever you're using them in the rest of your design. Okay, so those are numbers. Now let's look at extracting components. We've actually looked at a few of these already. So we saw that with dates, for example, we can extract the different components of the date. Let me just go to the current date and time here. Okay, so we have these different components that we can pull out. Another place you can extract are locations. So Bubble has a built-in current geographic position, but anywhere you're using a geographic address value, you have the ability to extract different components from that address. The street number, the city, the postal code, country code, very helpful. Another place you can extract components are the email address for users. So here, if I want to extract, for example, just the domain, or the alias or the top domain, if you've got a subdomain system going on with the email address. Great way to create conditional flows for signing up users that have to belong to a specific domain. Like if it's a company email or a school email, right? You can extract the domain to say, hey, this is not an email that belongs on our system, so you can't sign up, for example. Okay. Another way that you can extract values, let me pull a regular text here, is through regular expression. Now, if you're not familiar with regular expression, this is a way for you to create a pattern and find matches against that pattern. So for example, extract all of the capital letters, extract all of the numerical characters, extract all of the odd numbers, extract all spaces. There's lots of, I mean, you can really get very complicated with regular expression. And by complicated, I mean customized. I don't mean difficult necessarily, but there is a lot you can do with regular expression to create more robust matching of things when you want to extract very specific sequences or strings that match your pattern. Now let's take a look at the operators you have for working with lists. I'm going to move this text down here, and we're going to start with a list expression. Let's just do a search for users. So this is going to give me a list value. It's not compatible with the text element yet because I haven't actually gone to a field or any value that works with printing in a text, right? So with list values, you have operators that can help you work with the list as a whole or with individual items. So I can go to the first user, for example, and go to their first name, or the last user, or a random user, or I can go to, user number 50 out of my big list of users of thousands, if that's something that I need to do in that way. If I work with just the full list, okay, let's go back to here as well. I can show everybody's details for a specific field, right? So each item's first name. This is going to give me a comma separated list of all of these users because I haven't filtered it down to just one, of all of their first names or all of their emails, right? So that's why we see each items because we're working off of a list here. I can also truncate my list if I wanted. So of course I can add constraints, but let's say I wanted to get, the first 10. So I would say items until 10. This is still a list value because it's the first 10, it's 10 users. Or I could begin the list from number 10. So it's 10 and forward. So even if I have thousands of users, it starts at number 10 and it leaves out the first 9. Okay. A couple of reformatting that you can do with your list. Let's look at format as text. Now what this will do is take each individual user and allow you to display a specific thing per user. So this is going to help you display your list in a more easy to read format. So for example, let's say I want to show this user's first name, then next to this user's last name, and then let's put in parentheses this user's email address, like that. And I want to separate each item in my list with a line break. So the delimiter, I'm just going to punch in my enter key here so I create that line break like this. Okay, now I'm going to constrain my search so that I only show users that have a first name and only users that have a last name. Didn't mean to add the email there. Like this, so that my list is a little bit smaller for this preview. Okay, so we should be able to see about 6 or so users on separate lines with their first name, last name, and email address in parentheses next to them. There we go, just like that. Okay, now the first name and last name, it looks like it's pushing the, or I should say the email is being pushed to a second line, and that's just because the dimensions of this text is fixed to this width. So I'm going to unfix it like this, and then we should be able to see everything a little bit more cleanly. So the email is next to the name, just like that. So that helps you manipulate from one single expression how every individual item is going to display. That's a really powerful expression that you have there. This is great for printing things in emails as well. You know, let's say you have an e-commerce application and you want to send a confirmation to the customer of all of the items they purchased from their order. So this could be a list of their ordered items, their ordered products. And in this display, you can show the product's name next to the product price, next to the quantity. Okay, a lot you can do with that. Similarly, I can split up my list. Let's do this here. Or actually, I can split a single value and convert it to a list. Okay, so what I mean by that is, let's say we have, let's go off of this input here just to show you this example. And I have a text here. And I want to say, let's say that this is my shopping list of apples, oranges, bananas. Okay, so we have one single text value that somebody has typed in a list of things into one single text, but I want to be able to work with this as a list formatted text, right? So it's actually broken up into 3 separate items. So this inputs value, I can take the split by operator and split by the comma. And actually, I think I have comma space is a more accurate delimiter here. Okay, I'm splitting this single text value by comma space, and that's going to give me the individual items as a list of text, right? So this is going to now be formatted as a list of text. We go from one text to a list. And to make that even more obvious, let's actually display this in a repeating group. Because remember, repeating groups are specifically for working with lists. So I'm going to set the type of content here of this repeating group to a plain text. And the data source is going to be this expression that I have right here. Okay, let me remove this so that there's no confusion. All right, so this is my data source. It's the inputs value split by comma space. And let's make this more dynamic here. I'm just going to open up my cell. And inside of the cell, I'll display the text itself. Okay, so take a look at this. We're going to refresh the page. And this is just going in the opposite direction. It's taking a single text value, turning it into a list. There we go. Apples, oranges, bananas. Let me make my input visible again, because it's kind of hidden from us. This is something that we can then manipulate in real time if the user wants to add anything to this, right? Milk, eggs. It's just going to create in real time more cells in the repeating group. And from here within the repeating group, now I can do so many things. I can have a checkbox to help them check off their items. I can create records in the database from this. I can search and compare these items to other things in the database. I can create new products in my database if I wanted to, if I have that structure set up there. Okay, so that's one very, very handy expression here when working with lists. Now, let's say I wanted to convert a list back to a text. So let's actually take another example here. I'm going to do a search box like this. And let's have a repeating group again. Just looking for the best way to demonstrate this here. Should have kept it from before. That's okay. And I'm going to have this repeating group be a user. And I'm going to display inside of this the current cell's users email. Okay, so repeating groups need to have a data source of users, right? A list of users. So let's say by default, it's a search for users. Now, let's say I wanted to search for a specific user through the search box. Okay, the search box I'm going to set up to search through dynamically all of my user records by their first name. So let's say I found a match and I want that matching user to show up in this repeating group. Okay, because perhaps this repeating group is my table of users, my table of contacts. I've got other things designed in the cell to edit them, to email them, to select them, to create something for them. Okay, so this search box is simply a way for me to filter my users down. So because the repeating group cannot be set to one user at a time, I have to convert this single value to a list format, I should say. So what I'll do is in the conditions, I'm going to say when the search box has a value, so this value is not empty. In other words, we have found a result. I'm going to change the data source of this repeating group to be that search box's value. But here's the problem. The search box's value is only one user. The repeating group needs a list of users, just like we have here in the default data source. So what I can do from here is I can convert this single value format to a list of one. It's now in the list format, and we know that there's only one value here, so it's going to be a list of one item only. But now it's in a format that's compatible with the repeating group. So again, the idea is, let's say this repeating group, let's make it a little bit wider here, like this. This is kind of like a primary design to, edit the user or send an email to the user. Okay, so this is like your master table of users. Let's refresh this real quick. So by default, we see everyone. Okay, we see all of our users there. But then I want to search for someone specifically. So let's say I search for Monica. So the search box is set up to help me auto-complete, auto-find people. So I'll click on Monica, and now I have filtered my repeating group so that it matches with my found user here. The condition on this repeating group is passing. So I'm going to go to the inspector so you can see this more closely here. All right. So here's my repeating group's default data source. It's all users. Search for users. We get everyone in here, right? The whole list of users is there. However, the condition is going to change the data source to match the search box's value, and only if that search box's value is not empty, which in this case it's not. I have searched for Monica. That's the value there, right? It's not empty. So now the data source changes to Monica, converted to a list format where Monica is the only item in that list. It's a list of one. Okay, very handy to be able to do that, especially with search features like this. Okay, so we went from converting a single text, so our grocery list, but it was typed into one single text input, into an actual list that could be parsed out right into different cells. And then we also went from one single value, the search box value, that could be used in a list element, right? We converted it to a list of one so that it's in a list format. Again, there's so many different use cases for working with these operators. I just want to show you, how you can, where they are and how to work with them. But you're going to run into other scenarios that are going to benefit from these things too. So I do encourage you to play around with these things. Add inputs to the page, create lists with them, comma separate them. Don't get too fancy from the beginning, otherwise you're going to get lost. Start simple, come up with a goal, and see if you can manipulate them so that you can output the result that you're looking for. And that's how you're going to learn how to work with your dynamic data in really, really flexible ways. Now, the next thing is looking at calculations, and we've seen a couple of these things already in some of our previous windows. So obviously with a list of numbers, we'll be able to do math with those. So that's a big use case for calculations. Another is just calculating on list of items. So for example, if I'm searching for users, I can count the number of users in that list. That's a real-time count. I don't even have to refresh the page. The moment a new user is added, it's going to add them to that count. If I go to all of the users' creation dates, for example, I can aggregate on all of those dates. I can find the average. I can find the median, the date. I can find the earliest creation date, the latest creation date. Doesn't matter what order these are in, Bubble will find that min and max for me. We can also do that off of a list of numbers as well. Let's say that every user had some numerical value like their age. Okay, so I can find the youngest, the oldest, things like that. We also have calculations that we can perform on text as well. Let's do the current user's first name again. We can calculate the number of characters. Okay, this is helpful if you are creating some kind of a blog feature or a multi-line input where you want to restrict a number of characters. This can help you create conditions to prevent them from going over your limit like that. Calculations can also be found in some more complex operators that Bubble has, like grouping things, even in filters when you're adding constraints to your searches. I do encourage you to watch our video lesson on built-in expressions and calculators because we do go over the group by function in more detail to understand how to do that. That's great for plotting things on charts. Especially for dashboards and reporting. Just keep in mind that, again, Bubble reads everything from left to right, okay? The last thing that I want to go over, again, we've gone over it a little bit here, are the conditionals. So some of these expressions that you'll see here are not going to be operators or reformatting necessarily, but instead evaluators. So these are the ones that don't have the colons in front of them. So I can say first name is, Gabby. And this is going to check to see if this is true. And this is the value of this expression is simply a yes or no. Now, you may not have this displayed in a text this way as frequently. The more frequent place to have these conditional expressions is in your conditional logic. So only when the first name is Gabby do we want to, make this visible. Or maybe we want to change the color, some appearance property of this text, right? So if the name is Gabby, then we make these things happen. Or if the user's type is, is an admin, then we make it visible. If they're not an admin, right, they don't pass this condition, then it's no longer visible. This could be placed on a button that is admin only, okay? And this is off of, in this case, now it's off of an option set, right? Some other yes or no conditionals that you can add that you'll find with most things that would have a value is whether the value is empty or not. Is the user's type field, this is a field on the user data type, is it empty or is it not empty? Does it have a value or does it not have a value? You can create a condition around that. Same thing with most text things. Does the text contain certain characters or does it not contain certain characters? You can also add these types of constraints in your searches. If I'm searching for users, I can look for users where their full name contains certain characters or contains multiple keywords or equals something specific. Or as you saw before, looking for users where the full name isn't empty versus is empty. Okay, so those kinds of expressions and modifiers that you find here without the colon are typically going to be evaluators. Contains, doesn't contain, contains list, right? Because we're working with a list. Does that contain a separate list of items? For the most part, you'll see colons because those are going to manipulate the values themselves. But some of them are going to be validators. The last conditional expression that I want to show you is that you can actually default empty values to some other value. So for example, let's say that the current user's first name is empty for whatever reason. If that's the case, Bubble can default to something else. So it can default to another dynamic value if you want, or it can default to, something that you type in here, unnamed user. You can also take this expression and put it in a workflow as well, so that you never save an empty value to something in your database. It just depends on where you're using this. But this is a great way to always ensure that you never see an empty space when you're trying to display something back to your users. Okay. So with all of this said, these are the different types of manipulators that you can add to your dynamic expressions. Reformatting how things are displayed, extracting various components, working with lists in many ways, going from single values to list values so that you have that type compatibility, or just filtering the list, working with specific items in the list. Of course, calculations, performing math functions, counting up the number of characters, counting up the number of items in a list. And all of this is happening in real time on the page. Not once have we touched the database. Nothing is getting changed in the database, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that you don't have to go through the database for everything. Yes, it's helpful. It's great for really complex things where you want to pre-calculate and store things in the database to be able to reference easier, later, versus having to build out complicated expressions just to reformat and rebuild them again, rebuild your values again. But in a lot of cases, you don't need to do that. Sometimes it's just a matter of displaying certain things for certain screens and then different displays in other screens. So rather than saving all the different variations in your database, you just display them how you need per screen. And as long as you know where to go, you'll be able to do that more easily. So I leave you again with a challenge to create a blank page in your application and just get your hands on these expressions and these modifiers. Add different inputs to the page, play around with them, try working with single values versus list values to get comfortable with all of the different changes you can make to your expressions. All right, happy building.